So it's always a big challenge to figure out what this seemed like from those who were most directly affected, both historically and in the more contemporary situation that I've been writing about. So when it's historical cases of slum clearance and urban renewal removal, that kind of thing, there's often relatively little oral history, very few cases where anybody actually did interviews up until the West End of Boston, where that started to be something that people would do. But for 20 years before that, there was almost nothing. So one has to really rely on the archives of housing authorities and the archives of researchers who happen to have done a master's thesis working on this topic in real time and saved their materials, that kind of thing. But more recently, of course, it's possible to do a lot of interviewing. And what I've always tried to do, especially in these complicated redevelopment cases, is to figure out what the full range of players in each of these transformations has been, and to try and see the world through their eyes. That means understanding the viewpoint of developers. It means understanding designers. It means understanding social service providers. It means talking to lawyers and legal assistance people. And it certainly means talking to the residents themselves, both neighbors in these communities, but also the public housing residents who in many cases have lived through the worst imaginable kinds of conditions, and some of them are pushed out completely, and others stay on and return to a redeveloped community. So over the time, especially in some of the cities where a lot of the residents have been able to return, I've been engaged in processes that interview hundreds of public housing residents. And rather than it being the white guy professor from the fancy university coming over and talking to people, what we've tried to do is train residents to interview fellow residents and to try and understand the community from their perspective, and to co-develop the questions that we ask working with the resident organizations in these developments. So it's not just what I'm interested in learning, but also trying to figure out some ways of what would be useful to those in those communities. And I've been able to be very fortunate to have my research independent of some other kind of external funding, the public housing work, that is. And so I've really not had anybody's agenda looking over me, not HUD, not some foundation even in most cases, but been really able to start from the perspective of what the residents and their leaders wanted to tell me, and then expand out from that. I certainly have always wanted to talk to the management people and the housing authority people, and that they've always been very well aware of what I'm doing and certainly on board. But I've found that the only way to gain the trust of communities that have had such decades of mistrust built up is to start in a sincere way with engaging the residents and their leadership, and then trying to strive to go beyond the kind of designated resident representative and to try to reach a much broader cross-section of these communities. Sometimes that means having multilingual interviewers, for instance. So that's been a really important aspect of it for me, and in a way that I think has enabled the work to be fair-minded to a wide range of perspectives that are not often considered together.